All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Martech Show, episode 8, coming up here right before Thanksgiving week in the US. Looking forward to a little bit of turkey here soon. I am so excited for our guest today here, Benjamin Bloom. Ben Bloom, Senior Director and Analyst at Gartner, does a whole bunch of incredible work on marketing technology and how it's actually getting used and utilized in organizations. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott.
So you guys recently published, one of your latest reports looking at marketing spend, and then in particular, the subset of how that was being impacted in marketing technology, and then just a bunch of other factors about how people are actually using that spend and using that marketing technology. So you were kind enough to bring some graphics with you, which always is helpful. And so let's dive in. I feel like one of the first things in your report that I turned the page to and I'm like, wow, that's kind of wild. It felt like for years we'd had this shift, this trend where companies were increasingly would report claiming that, hey, it's a best of breed strategy. Yeah, there's the whole integrated suite concept, but best of breed is kind of the way most people were being, heading with their MarTech strategy. And then all of a sudden in this report, there was a 30-point jump, in the number of folks who said, yep, integrated suite, we either lean towards it or strongly prefer it. What's happening?
Yeah, I think we had observed this similar dynamic where we'd seen it in 2018, 2019, kind of a continued march toward the idea of selecting, the best component for the right job and really narrowly defining that. So that might mean that you're buying more total solutions, but that you're trying to string them together. And that, of course, introduces some burdens on teams to be able to both procure and validate those solutions, that they can match the business opportunity, that they can then integrate those tools. And sometimes that might mean that you have to do more technical work or more collaborative work in order to get those things to pay off. And part of what I think has happened is that, as we see, the marketing technology budget is 26% of the total CMO's expense budget. That is both a tremendous opportunity and a huge burden. And so if you're thinking about how do we make sure that those investments are actually going to deliver, I think we think that those certainly would deserve some scrutiny, right? How are we going to make sure that we're living up to that kind of demand to be a good steward of resources? And I think what has happened in the last, we're in November now, so 8-9 months, is a dramatic shift in consumer behavior, dramatic shifts in the business environment, and responding to these disruptions has been an executive level conversation. Another Gartner survey of members of boards of directors found that 7 in 10 members of boards of directors said that their company had accelerated or increased their investments in digital transformation as a result of that disruption. And that brings everybody to the table. You can't really have the CMO saying, this is only my job. This is everybody's job at this point. And so that might mean sales, service, commerce, operations. It might mean the back office is involved. And I think that's the lens that I would put on part of this shift in buyer behavior, where now we would anticipate that a more cross-functional group has a wider number of demands, that they all need to be run in parallel. And the urgency means they might not be able to run multiple RFPs at the same time. And as a number of the integrated suite vendors have tried to position these kinds of packaged offerings as, hey, we can be a one-stop shop for you. I think that has been something that the buyers are looking for. And they might already have 1 or 2 modules from some of these vendors. And they say, well, we can make those investments a little bit more valuable. So I think some of those discussions are absolutely happening.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And it makes a lot of sense. I think some of this might even be just like my perception of when people were talking about marketing suites 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was largely about a collection of capabilities for marketing anyway. And, I think part of what, led to this whole best of breed explosion was just, there was so many different varied things happening in marketing land, that was really hard for one vendor to just keep up with all of those. Now, certainly, these suites have expanded. I mean, they've acquired or built, a lot of, capabilities. So you can see certainly getting more of that. But yeah, if I'm understanding, the perspective you're bringing there, it's like, okay, well, maybe that's one dimension of, these suites can do more marketing capabilities than they could have before. But perhaps even more so, it's like, this isn't just marketing. It's the fact that, these suites aren't so much Martech suites as much as they are, I don't know, like front office, business suites. It's like, okay, well, I need the module for my customer support organization. I need the solution for my sales organization. And then you absolutely, there's this vision of wanting to get these all connected to a common platform. Just makes a ton of sense. I guess what I would ask is, just focusing on marketing for a moment, the data we'd seen from, a variety of other studies over the years is that, marketers do have a pretty broad collection of tools that are very specific to marketing. I guess I wonder, like, is this a world where you have both? Like, okay, well, we're using the integrated suite as sort of our fundamental platform that's actually connecting multiple departments across the organization. But at the same time, marketing also has a number of additional tools that provide more specialized capabilities, but perhaps now with the requirement that, okay, we need those tools to integrate to the suite that we've chosen as our primary platform. What's your sense of that?
Well, I think a couple of things are happening. Number one is that the largest Martech vendors, the Oracle, Adobe, Salesforce, SAP, those vendors have absolutely been hearing from their customers and making changes that partially improve the kind of openness of their product ecosystem. I think if you were to look maybe 3 to 5 years ago, the most likely route for getting a productized integration between one of those large vendors and more of an upstart point solution might have been, hey, we either need to ask very nicely. That might be challenging. It might be that you need to ensure that you are a participant in some of the iPaaS or other integration platform ecosystems, or you have to form some kind of joint go-to-market partnership where you're not perceived as a competitor. And in some ways, that's one of the things we've seen in markets like tag management or customer data platforms that seem to be forming a kind of glue between the data and orchestration engines of the marketing technology stack. And I think at the same time, some of the technical debt that accrues to the M&A strategies that some of these vendors have pursued is like catching up to them. And I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago, some of the vendors started to really stare that down and say, we won't be able to compete if we can't evolve and break away from some of those things that are holding us back. And so I think there is some of that in terms of the suites are becoming a little bit more open. And at the same time, I think even if you said that buyers are excited about the idea of having their own integration platform or running their own technology suite that brings all these different pieces together alongside an integrated suite or particular platform, they might not be able to do it with all of their pure marketing capabilities. The number of developers that marketing has is clearly, they're out of position to hire developers in most cases. And so you have to lean on some other resources in the enterprise if you want to get the work done. And so dealing with those burdens, I think, is something that teams are now really confronting because, again, the volume has just absolutely been turned up.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Hey, to our attendees in the live studio audience, I see a couple folks raising their hand. If you use the Q&A feature here in Zoom to send over your question, I'm going to go for a few more slides here with Ben, and then, yeah, in about 15 minutes or so, we'll open it up, start taking questions. If you're comfortable actually asking your question, over audio, or if you're feeling bold over video, we'll bring you up to the panel as well too. So definitely send in your questions and we will get to them. But I want to cover some of these other slides that you had sent over. This was another one that's, yeah, fascinating. This discussion around, wow, there's so much here. I would say the two things that jump out at this is the whole question of utilization and what does that really mean? But then also, even in the, head here, you've, talked a bit about complexity, which I think is another fascinating question to dive into. But let me start by asking you, like, okay, so 42% of the Martech stack, Martech capabilities is not being utilized. What does that mean?
Well, I think part of that depends on who's asking, but one way that I think about this is, we continuously see the marketers are pretty optimistic, and they often have, some little bias, right? That they went to bat to buy some new amazing piece of technology. It's a little bit hard to turn around and say, well, that actually, was not a good investment, and that all that stuff that I said before, I was wrong. And admitting, those kinds of things, of course, is a challenge. But I also think that if you said to a senior executive, you're talking to the CFO, and you say, well, we're using 58% of our capabilities, and the CFO says, oh, wait a minute, what about the other 42%? Like, we're still paying for all of that stuff, aren't we? And can we get some of that money back, because we have other things that we'd like to do with it? And so, while that's not a one-to-one association that that you can make in most marketing technology products, I think that's a pretty big gap, right? If the 58% is sort of glass half full, like, oh, well, it's more than half, I think the flip side of that is where substantial risk is sort of lurking. And if you think about this as almost a math problem, right? There's the top half, which is how much you're utilizing, the bottom half, like how much extra capability is there, or how much capability is there in aggregate. Maybe the vendors have added a lot of additional stuff that teams just don't feel is the core reason that they bought the product. But even if there's some of that at play, I think it calls into question whether there is truly a fit between the solution that's been acquired and whether teams are prepared to utilize it, or whether it was the right fit to begin with. And when we think about how teams are actually going to overcome some of those challenges, it really does seem to be more of a people problem and less of a technology problem. It's, are you able to collaborate with other stakeholders to be able to bring new processes together, change the way you do your internal work so that you can leverage these pieces of technology? If you're stuck trying to do personalized dynamic content in email or on web, and you're still, all of your designers design in Photoshop, you cut it up into squares and then turn that into an email, those kinds of processes might miss substantial opportunities. And so you might need to really work pretty hard to change the way you do business also, in addition to adopting some of these new technologies. And so I think the combination of a daunting level of new technology and the challenge of driving transformation at a human level, the technology can't do that for you.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love the way you sort of picture that as like the numerator and the denominator of like, okay, in the numerator of like, what's the percentage of the capabilities we're utilizing that, yeah, very much should be under the control, of the organization. And then, yeah, the denominator of all the possible things you could utilize, that's very much a function of the vendors. It's interesting if, I guess you mentioned in passing, like, Photoshop or whatnot. And it's funny, I actually think that's kind of a great example where like the Adobe Creative Suite, oh my God. I mean, there is just like capabilities in the Creative Suite that like, are vast and numerous. Yet I would imagine for a lot of graphic designers, and creative professionals who are using that, they're probably using a very small subset of what's possible in the Creative Suite, but what they're being judged on is not the percentage of bells and whistles that they're using out of Creative Suite. It's like, hey, are you producing content that's friggin' amazing that, blows people away? And so I guess that's part of what I wonder, when the utilization question comes up, and maybe it's a difference between saying, okay, what's the percentage of all possible features in this stuff that I'm using, which may or may not correlate to, business value, versus a slightly different take on it, which is to say, okay, out of the features that we should use, things that we actually, part of why we bought this was because we thought we'd be able to do A, B, and C, and at the moment we're only able to do A, and the things that are holding us back from doing B and C are some of the things that, yeah, you found here in like these list of impediments of like, yeah, this is organizational or human challenges. I mean, would you say the focus should be on that latter? Is it okay to have a whole number of features that somewhere are buried down deep in a product, but maybe aren't relevant to our org if we don't use those?
Well, it's a problem not just in the organization, but in the technology, right? So you have to think about the current, your current ecosystem of technologies and whether the things that you have still reflect the way that you want to do business. And we have a construct like a marketing technology audit, which would help to uncover maybe unused technologies, or would help to say, well, actually, we didn't know that all of these other features exist when we bought the tool, and now either we don't need them or we do, and what are we doing about that? Sort of raising that point with the group of stakeholders who can make an impact on that is something that requires people to actually be looking for those opportunities. So
Mhm.
even if there's only some change that you would need in order to say that this investment is still delivering, I think we continuously see that teams, when I talk to Gartner clients about their use of some of these large complex technologies, they aren't really doing all of the advanced
Mhm.
things. And so that to me suggests there's a lot of unused capability. I think your point about Creative Cloud is fascinating. I'm certainly not an expert in in the design workflows or in in the creative side of Adobe's products, but if you're buying Photoshop and all you're doing is resizing images, right? Like that to me is a
Mhm.
classic case where either you could use more stuff that would make you more impactful potentially, or maybe you have bought a product that while it does certain things, it also
Mhm.
uh, might not be the right fit for the kind of work that you're doing. And I think in Martech, we are seeing some of these entrants that aim at the very long tail of much smaller businesses, but that they're still offering multi-step campaign management and event triggered marketing and certain capabilities. So even if they're not appropriate for the enterprise, they might be a fit for for some organizations. So I think as these features become a little bit more standard, maybe some of that will go away. But I think the challenge that we're asking in our surveys, where we're asking respondents to kind of make an estimate, still represents a pretty big number in terms of how much isn't being used. And if you think of this from a cost standpoint, I go into deeper depth in this in my
Mhm.
presentation I'm giving in a couple weeks at our symposium event about sort of the ROI question, like how much if the if you're thinking that you're licensing technology on a relatively fixed cost basis, for some set number of months or years, and you are using 58% of that. Let's just apply that broadly to one specific tool. Utilizing 58%, how much extra cost do you have to utilize 60% or 62%? Well,
Mhm.
probably almost none. Maybe you have to pay for an extra seat or two. And so I think the ROI of utilizing a little bit more of your technology is going to scale a lot faster than the extra expense. And that to me is a huge opportunity for teams to think about this from a utilization and a business standpoint.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, I'm recalling, many years ago when marketing automation was first, coming to the fore. Yeah, people would buy these very sophisticated marketing automation systems, and then yeah, there were studies for quite a few years where it's like, yeah, it turned out basically all they were doing was this like batch and blast motion that they could have done with a product at one fraction of the price.
Mhm.
But all right, well, let's actually move on to your next slide here too, because I think this is part of what you have sort of honed in on is like, okay, if we recognize there is this gap in utilization, there's a lot more we could be doing to harness more value in these systems. What holds us back? And yeah, it sounds like all this energy being spent in like, well, let's buy the ultimate marketing technology, and then question mark, question mark, question mark, step 3, profit, like what's missing here in, that step 2.
Right. The classic sort of example, I think, is, how when you went to buy, I mean, maybe we're not buying as many cars as we used to, but the car salesman wants to sell you a car, and you look at the shiny car on the showroom floor, and it looks, or you test drive it, and looks great, smells great, it's got that new car smell. And yet the salesman isn't always saying like, oh, well, how good a driver are you? Do you know how to use all of these features? And I actually worked on an automotive brand campaign many years ago where it turned out that the buyers were dissatisfied, not because the vehicle was not of high quality, but because they didn't know how to use it. And you know that turned out to be a multi-pronged kind of CRM effort to just fix that as an attitude. And so I think where you look at some of the things that teams say that they are working on actively, they're a lot more focused on either building business cases, setting a marketing technology strategy. They're looking at how they're going to buy the right vehicles, right? The right technology, and not enough on things like making kind of strategic investments in training and education. And I think if you look at the 41% of respondents who said that they had responsibility for kind of supporting that ongoing training, that to me felt like there's not enough focus
Yeah.
on ensuring that you can adapt your business to the technologies that you want to use to deliver.
Yeah, actually, your whole car analogy here like really struck home with me. Like the first new car I ended up buying, I remember I'd gone into a showroom. I was, in my 20s, perhaps not as wise. I'd only driven like an automatic, and there was this car in the showroom, this like tiny little like Mazda Miata that like just was so cool. And he's like, well, the salesperson was like, yeah, and it's a stick. And I'm like, well, how hard is it to learn stick? No, not at all. Like, I'll show you in the parking lot on the way out. Yeah, all right. So I was that guy. That's embarrassing to admit. Let's edit this out. All right. So companies that are like, yeah, like sort of missing this education and training component, or at least maybe not entirely missing, but just not like putting as much into it. Are there the companies who seem to be doing a better job of that? Like, are there any sort of like, best practices, or, I mean, is it the Martech team that does that, the marketing ops, or is there like a enablement team that, focuses on this, or how do people get better at solving this gap?
Well, I think part of it is you have to think about it as something that happens all the time, as opposed to something that happens some of the time or at specific intervals, right? The idea that you're going to trust your team members to become subject matter experts in particular technologies, that they are going to master what the business actually needs, and then somehow and do all of their day-to-day work, and then in their spare time, they're going to go out and learn all these new amazing things. And while a number of vendors have really focused on customer success as a way to try to improve the retention of customers on their own platforms, I think what I would say is that if you are not paying attention to the kinds of talent and training opportunities, you're probably leaving it up to chance. And maybe that hasn't caught up to you yet, but I think as organizations look at retaining their own talent, you have to make sure that that's part of what people are expecting, and that you're supporting them, and that should be kind of mutually beneficial, right? That adage about what happens if we invest in our people and they leave, and the question is like, well, wait a minute, what if they stay? And so I think there's that dynamic at play. Some things that we see that can be additive would be thinking about technology not as a collection of features, that you're buying features. Well, really, the features are just an input to capabilities, right? The combination of talent and process and technology that will actually get the work done. And teams that take that kind of capability first approach do seem to have a more mature and cross-functional approach. And I think we are seeing the kind of marketing operations trend as something that could be really helpful, where Martech might have in the last several years, really prided itself on kind of subject matter expertise, right? The mastery of understanding the dynamics of the marketing technology ecosystem, as diverse and vast as it is. The other component is, okay, well, now you actually need to use it. And the teams that have been focused on not just buying shiny objects, but saying, okay, let's really buckle in and figure out how we are going to change the way we do our work, which has been absolutely motivated by this kind of agency insourcing trend on the creative side. I think Martech just needs to catch up in terms of driving an improved level of collaboration with marketing operations teams to try to say, well, here's what we have available. Can you help us to bring people along in their adoption of our technology stack?
All right, that is the perfect segue to the last slide you brought with you. That I would say, yes, if the shift from best of breed back to suite caught me by surprise, this next one even more so. I mean, it's almost like one of the founding concepts of the marketing technologist movement was like, well, marketing can't rely on IT to get these capabilities in place for it. So, it can collaborate with IT, but, ultimately, marketers have to be responsible for the capabilities they need to execute their job. And so you'd sort of seen this shift over years of like, okay, actually more and more marketing organizations, even if they were collaborating with IT, they were kind of taking the primary responsibility to make sure that their marketing stack was going to do what they needed it to. And then all of a sudden, like, yeah, this data you came out with this time shows a really significant shift back towards IT and or external service providers. We'll dig into that a bit, but yeah, pretty significant shift to someone other than the marketing team, having the responsibilities for like the Martech roadmap and, the budget and what tools are being, selected. And what's happening here? Is this the same thing as like the shift back for suite? Is it like, well, you tell me.
Well, this is something where one of the surprises was that when for some of these categories, external service providers were a negligible response in terms of our 2019 data set. So a lot of this is IT, but a lot of it is also the external service providers. And I think we talk about this being a kind of everybody comes together kind of a moment. I think we are seeing people say, well, wait a minute, we have to do this, but we don't know how. Where are we going to find those resources and capabilities to help us with a range of kind of different tasks? And so I think as that urgency has really motivated a lot of agencies and service providers to say, well, hey, we actually could help you, but they might not be talking to a marketing stakeholder. They might be talking to someone in customer service, they might be talking to someone in finance, they might be talking to someone else in the C-suite, and that can definitely bring a lot of these conversations together. But at the same time, the idea that a mature organization looks at outcomes and who's going to get the work done is less the question like, where do you report into, and it's more of a question of, can we do it and how quickly can we do it and can we all work together and get it done? And I think we saw that a little bit in the sort of change in buyer behavior. But I think here, as that sort of proverbial rubber meets the road, right, in the car analogy, I think we are hopeful that teams that really look at who's going to get the work done as everyone's trying to pitch in, and that might not be inside of marketing. And so I think the marketing technology teams that are going to be successful in the next 18 months or so are ones that really do think about collaborating, and not always trying to build. At the same time, I do think that IT systems are changing. I think we saw that kind of collaboration zone as something that was a hallmark of our findings last year, in terms of a lot of these teams just seem like they are, more than half of teams really think about this as kind of shared responsibilities where we play to each other's strengths. And I think the shift that we're seeing now is that IT organizations, after seeing the CMO and marketing kind of get a lot of credit as being this new organizational profit center, which kind of changes that dynamic. IT is saying, wait a minute, we've been building technology that enables our business for years, and we want a part of that. And so some of that marketing and IT dynamic has really become less of a challenge, as everyone's kind of said, well, wait a minute, we want to build together around the customer. Everyone can get behind that. And so while marketing might have some level of ownership, I think here we're seeing that IT is also coming to the table prepared. They're having more knowledgeable conversations about what business stakeholders want. There's the data questions are definitely bringing a lot more cross-functional teams together to think about, well, wait a minute, we've got data lakes and we have to do advanced analytics over here. And a lot of those teams that are required for, let's say, predicting customer behavior aren't necessarily going to be located fully inside of marketing. And that kind of is driving some of this collaboration as well.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I guess like the collaboration side of it has always, seemed like the right way to go, in the sense that, yeah, I mean, each of these teams has a certain set of strengths. I guess my impression had always been like there were a number of actual use cases that marketing needed to get served, that traditionally the staff, in IT departments just weren't very familiar with those use cases, and so a mode where, marketing defines its use cases, and then I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess it's that translation of like, it's one thing for marketing to say, okay, these are our use cases and here are the technologies we think will help address them. IT, can you validate those technologies or vet them on these other dimensions? Are they going to be secure? Are they going to provide the right sort of SLAs? Will they integrate with the rest of other systems? I get that, but this idea of saying like, okay, well, maybe marketing now has their wish list of use cases. They turn it over to the IT department to say, okay, find the capabilities that will give us these use cases. It's actually, it's a pretty exciting, I mean, if we're making that shift, I think that's as much of a huge credit to, the evolution of IT as anything. I guess it just, is that happening? I mean, I guess the data would suggest it is, but that seems like it just, like the domain expertise around marketing just feels like it always been pretty far away from like the core IT mindset. But yeah, do you really think that's changing now?
I do. I think we're seeing IT try to approach the business. And when I say the business, it means kind of everybody else in the organization. But that could be finance or service or marketing or commerce and operations. And I think that those conversations are happening in a more nuanced fashion now. And the other thing that's really interesting is that if you think about some of the headwinds to the avalanche of data that we're seeing kind of coming into the organization, we're also seeing more constraints. We're seeing consumers who might not be as interested in having their data harvested and used for predicting their every move. We're seeing a lot more awareness within the enterprise that an opt-in or opt-out of an email preference center is not the full extent of how you could govern customer data. And mature IT organizations are typically great at thinking about governance. And governance is scary to marketers. Most of the time, they say governance, that sounds like someone's going to say no, right? And what I think, and typically I say, well, wait a minute, instead of governance, just think of it as business rules. Oh yeah, business rules, oh yeah, I get that. So you can overcome some of that, as an objection. But I think the other piece of it is that we are moving to a world where IT wants to use technology to overcome some of these problems, where it used to be, hey, here's a box, you can only be in this box, and if you, anything that is not inside of this box of things that legal or any other part of the organization will let us do, uh, that's a hard no. Just don't even ask. You're going to get stuck in in some kind of conversation that you don't want to participate in. But tools like some of these marketing resource management or work management tools have been able to bring a lot more agility to processes that up until now would have been real showstoppers in terms of delivering certain kinds of marketing campaigns, particularly in regulated industries. And I think IT is playing a big part in enabling technology to solve problems and find a way to say yes instead of saying our only mode is no.
Awesome. All right, I'm digging this like new generation of IT. I think that's pretty exciting. All right, so we've got at least first question that's coming in from Gianni. Gianni, if you want to ask your question live, please take it away.
Yes, hi. Thanks, Scott. Great show today with a guest. Mr. Bloom, thank you. Really informative. I guess my question is around when you're thinking about sort of this transition of best of breeds to integrated suites, what are you seeing in terms of AI type of offerings versus your typical just sort of SaaS modular for the market, let's say mid-market, not enterprise? Because a lot of what you were saying sounded to me that best of breed is kind of dying away a bit or losing share, and companies are trying to become a little bit more nimbler and think of integrated suites that might be a better fit for their organization. So what's your take on that?
Well, a couple of things. One is that the trend towards introducing AI or machine learning as ways to, which have a whole host of use cases, introducing those into the marketing technology stack has, instead of it being, there's only one place where it lives, it's sort of everywhere. And I think we're moving from AI is going to take over decisioning to AI is going to help marketers get their work done. And that's something where it can surface an opportunity to adjust a marketing campaign, or to identify that there is a gap, an audience that's not being served, or some other opportunity for the marketer to then take action. Because we talk about that 58% of marketing technology capabilities are actually in use versus the 42% that aren't. And so a lot of the time you have busy marketers who aren't necessarily able to know everything that they could be doing. So I think there's a role not just in building AI into products, but also meaning for sort of the core of what those products do, but also building them into interfaces so that actually now you have an assistant, you have somebody who's helping you to get your work done. And I think that's even more critical in the mid-market, where you might have somebody who's wearing a lot more hats. You might have tools that are a little bit more attuned to to particular users and use cases. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the AI or machine learning kind of isn't there, but a lot of vendors have really taken the approach of trying to instead of giving you an AI product that's sort of a blank slate, they give you, a set of particular things that fit into the way the tool can be used. And so I think we're seeing a heavier level of productization in both the enterprise and the mid-market.
Awesome. Thanks for the question, Gianni. If anyone else has a question, yeah, feel free to pop that into the Q&A. while we're waiting to see if someone else wants to jump in. And what a great opportunity to get your question answered by Ben Bloom. So please ask away. But on this slide we were on, you had mentioned that when we started talking about this, okay, it's not just IT, it's also like a pretty significant jump, in working with external service providers. I assume that's partly just because under the circumstances of 2020, where people are like, okay, that 5-year digital transformation plan we had, can we do that in 5 months? It leads one to creative options, but what's your sense of who's doing that right? Like if someone's thinking about an external service provider, as a way to accelerate this, beyond just building their own internal capabilities, what should they be thinking about?
Well, I think you have to think about structuring these relationships in the right way. One of the things that I have observed is for teams that have accepted as part of their technology solution, maybe they've accepted some vendor managed services, or they have outsourced particular operations to some kind of a marketing service provider. And the risk, I think, when you pursue those kinds of environments is that, yes, the work might get done and you have relatively predictable costs in terms of how those vendors are going to serve you, but they have a particular statement of work, they have a particular scope that they're trying to execute on, they have their own margins that they need to protect. And so they're not really incentivized to reduce their costs. And at the same time, the cost basis of marketing technology is relatively fixed, as I was talking about earlier. And so if you think about this almost as an analogy between like renting an apartment and buying a home or a condo, right? You're building equity, building internal knowledge and IP is really useful for delivering agility. And so the lens that I would put on this is structure your relationships with any external service provider that might be jumping in excitedly to fill a gap. Structure it so that part of what they're doing is teaching your team, and think about that as something you will draw down over time. And I think what we've seen in the agency landscape overall is at first it looked like the insourcing trend was going to destroy the business or have a major impact on it. But I think what a lot of agencies realized was they don't really like resizing banners. What they would love to do is help you to come up with groundbreaking new creative ideas. And so that repositioning to things that are more strategic while letting brands take more of the tactical work in-house, there are definitely some analogies to that in marketing technology. And I think as the best vendors and the best service providers make you smarter. They are invested with you in your success. And so that's one of the really kind of important elements of this new environment, where you might need to scramble to find who can help you. But at the same time, if digital commerce was 2% of your top line, and it turns out that now it's all you have, the volume of what you need to do and who needs to do it might also be shifting dramatically. And so I think part of what we're seeing is a sense of trying to pull from just anywhere that you can. And the risk, I think, again, is to make sure that you're enabling your internal team to continue to grow, learn, and be able to take over some of those responsibilities one day.
Cool. All right. Well, I have one last question of my own for you, and it wasn't in these slides, but the report that you published around this. One of the things that you've sort of honed in on your research is how these teams think about their plan. For Martech capability evolution. And I think you had like a few different categories. That there's some people where it's this, very structured, rigid, project man. There could be a Gantt chart, that view of it. There's a bunch of folks who it's kind of just ad hoc, like, all right, yeah, well, I guess what do we need this month? And then this other category that you honed in on of those who are approaching it in a structured way, but an agile structured way. I know you had an update on, some of that data in this latest report. Can you just share a little bit about, how that's working?
Yeah, so the teams that take an agile approach to their marketing technology roadmap are about 10% of the respondents to our survey. So it's definitely not the majority. I think these are very challenging processes to just pick up from from nothing. And so, just as we've seen with agile development, there's what we say we are agile versus we have agile processes, which have some methodological hallmarks in terms of how you organize teams, how you think about breaking down work, and how you think about getting work done in an iterative fashion. And what we found was really surprising, which was that the agile teams are actually just getting so much more done. They're much more likely to have run new proofs of concept, to have integrated new pieces of technology. And this is when we asked, what have you done in the last 6 months? And so these teams are better able to act and respond to disruption. And if we were to look forward, whether things return to some kind of new normal quickly or slowly, or there's new challenges that arise, I think we'd have to say it's likely that we're going to see more change and disruption than less. And so to prepare for that kind of an environment, you need to be able to adapt your marketing and your marketing technology to fit new marketing strategies. And that absolutely suggests that these agile planners have an advantage over teams that take an ad hoc approach where there's really no strategy, a best effort approach where, hey, we're just doing the best we can, guy. And then there are those that have a formal marketing technology roadmap, and the formal roadmap is about 44% of the respondents. But I can send you some links that you might want to share with your audience that can help them to dig in a little bit more on some of that we've made available on our site.
Cool. Yeah, that's great. I'll post that in with the show notes. We are at time. Ben, thank you so much for coming to share. Yeah, just the wealth, of insights from your research. I know you've got your Gartner symposium coming up in a couple weeks. So Gartner clients or ones who should become Gartner clients, yeah, definitely should attend and get an even deeper dive into this. Yeah, thank you. This is just given certainly me a lot to think about. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Gianni, thank you for your question. Everyone for tuning in. Those in the US, I hope you have a great Thanksgiving week, and we will see everyone back in December. Have a great day.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Scott.